Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of BAInsights. Today, we're going to be focusing on defining the problem and the opportunity. And I'm very, very pleased to have some excellent guests with me, as usual, this time to talk about this particular topic. So, very shortly, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Elizaveta Ivankova.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Elizaveta, and I'm business analyst, and now I'm based in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. I've been working as a business analyst for more than 11 years now, and mostly I focus on IT solutions for the business, but also while I was switching from industry to industry, I see that on different projects, I need to start with the business needs first, and then proceed with the software solution. So I think today's topic is the perfect place to discuss that.
Thank you, Elizaveta. Thank you. And Joe, over to you, if I may, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Jo Francis. I'm a principal consultant at Socketim Advisory. I've been in service design, business analysis type roles over the last 16 years, very much focused on public services, so local government, central government, and always looking at problems and how they can be solved on both a micro level and kind of a much larger scale across the whole organization. So yeah, hopefully can give some insight today into my experience as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. And last but not least, Stefan, if you would, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stefan Bossuwé. I'm a business analyst between almost 20-25 years. Professional experience for more than 30 years on 20 different industries. And I've been hooked on problems already during my teenager years. So I have been able to carry on that let's say this I'm looking for the English word, but anyway, this being hooked up into my professional life for the beginning, and that's fun.
Brilliant, thank you, Stefan. And I guess to that point, it's probably useful moving into a BA career, because now you can actually think about problems in a more structured way, perhaps, than before you would have done previously. But I'm sure we'll get to that. But thank you again, everybody, for your kind introductions. We'll start the first topic with really why it's important to define the problem and the opportunity. I'd like to start with Elizaveta, if I may.
Well, in my experience, it's really important to understand what problem we are trying to solve in order to save money, save time, and really focus on the value and the goals we are trying to achieve. Because very often I notice that people who do not have technical background try to make technical decisions, and they come to development team with already some solution in mind. And it took me some time to dig to the problem so that we can suggest a more elegant solution, cheaper and faster than the initial one that was requested. Any other ideas or maybe experiences on why?
Joe, over to you, please.
Yeah, sure. So I completely agree. I think often people come with the solution rather than the problem. And when you dig into a problem, it's not always the problem that you first thought it was. And sometimes it can be multiple problems that can be solved by something quite simple. And actually quite often you don't even need a technical solution. Often we do, but sometimes we don't. And I think it's just important to help to define the scope as well, because sometimes you can end up digging into a lot of detail on one part when actually you step back and look at the scope. Sometimes it changes the project in itself or what you're trying to achieve. But also what I've experienced as well is that as you go through, quite often the problem can change over time as well, depending on how long the project is or what it is that you're trying to achieve. So having that continuous review back to what is the original problem and has it changed since we already started. So doing that continuous kind of engagement with people as well. Stefan, do you have any views?
Oh, now, well, a lot of experience and also bad experience that I've been thrown into a project where people already had made decisions and so on and so on and so on. And at a certain moment, I became more mature on that. And it says like, it's mostly projects don't go very well or even going wrong because the real problem is not even discovered. And one of those projects, I went back, they had a solution in mind, €1 million, recurrent cost of 100,000 euros for each year. And it says like, but what you want to solve, what do you achieve? We want that solution. Yep. What you want to do with that solution? And in those discussions, we found out what the real problem was. And at the end, it has costed them about 50,000 euros with analysis, with market campaigns, because people had to work differently. No IT involved, so no IT solution involved, just working differently, other procedures, other processes. And it was so cheap compared to the final solution. So if you really dig into the problem, sometimes, as Joan already said, you can find easier solutions, or maybe not that good, but good enough to solve the problem, but much cheaper or less impact. And as Einstein once said, if I have 1 hour to save the world, I would probably take 55 minutes to think about the problem, to understand the problem. Then at that moment, 5 minutes would be sufficient to find a solution. And I agree with that. But anyone, as both Joan and as Elizaveta already said, people are always so busy with the solution without even understanding the real problem or opportunity. No.
That's right. I agree. And I've not heard that saying before. I've certainly not read into it, but makes absolute sense. And I think that's right, because certainly I've come across similar experiences as you've all mentioned, in terms of being assigned to a project to deliver a particular piece of technology or to change a certain area, and there's not been sufficient analysis on why we should be changing or why we should be introducing the technology. And as a matter of working on those projects, you understand a bit more about the stakeholders. You understand that they have a whole range of problems that are sometimes outside of the scope of that technology, which means it's a missed opportunity really to have fixed and provided much wider benefit. So I think starting perhaps with the problem statement, that can certainly help us think about the wide range of problems there are to fix, because there's often a number of them that may be falling into the same theme, or might be fixed by the same solution. But I think for me as well, it naturally causes me to think about, not just problems, because problems always seems to be quite a negative thing, but to think, as we're doing that, are there any opportunities that are of a similar nature that we wanted to do, things we wanted to improve, things make life a bit easier for people perhaps, and we've not had the opportunity to do so before. So I think bringing those two together for me is quite nice actually at that point. I was saying, and of course I think to the point that Joe made, it really just gives us a nice basis for understanding the scope and getting everybody together to be clear on what the issues are, what the problem is, and what that scope is, so that we can all move forward with it. So there's no doubt, if we don't do that, the problems around the scope and the lack of clarity around the problem becomes another problem in itself, and we end up, I think, as to the point that Stefan's making, to invest money where it shouldn't be invested and spend money where it's unnecessary.
Yeah, and also it reminded me that it's helpful later during the development stage, when we can actually explain to developers why we are doing that, or to people involved in the project why exactly this solution was chosen. It's really good to go to the root cause of this, to the problem, and discuss it once again, because as John mentioned, sometimes problems change, and if we are still solving the initial problem and it fits, that's fine. But if problem has changed and now we just getting this scope creep out of nowhere, maybe it's not out of nowhere, it's because the business environment has changed so much that we are trying to solve the new problem, also old problem, and maybe some potential problems without even knowing that.
That's it. I think the things you were demonstrating there, Elizaveta, without the structure, just trying to think about these things on the fly is difficult enough and verbalizing, but let alone trying to do it in a project without the proper structure. I guess it takes me on to think about the next question as well, which is really how you approach understanding, how you might validate, or you might even go on to define, be it the problem or the opportunity. And I wonder if I can start with yourself, Joe, on this occasion.
Yeah, sure. Oh gosh, I've got loads of views on this, but I think obviously we're talking about BA techniques here, but it's not just about business analysis. It's about user research, it's about service design, it's about co-design, it's about the technical skills and everything that you need along the way. And there's kind of some core elements to this as well. So when you first start, you research, you do your request for informations, and you're really trying to understand, again, what that problem is by digging into what's the data that we have, what do we know, what questions haven't been asked or answered at the early parts of that. And once you're kind of happy with having just enough detail to be able to move into starting to come up with ideas and potentially solutions, you can kind of jump back and forth between the two as well. So as you start looking into the solutions, you jump back into, well, actually, we've got some questions here that need to be answered before we can proceed on to the next bit. And then once you've got your ideas, there are so many different ways of doing that as well. So you've got your process mapping, you can do canvases, you can create research walls, all sorts of things. And then you go into more of the prototyping stage as well. But I think the key thing is to loop back into that research and come back to that problem time and time again, because actually you could get further on down the line and actually the solution you start up and designing doesn't look quite right, or the customers aren't entirely happy with it when they're involved in testing, and you have to kind of loop back round. So it's almost like a continuous kind of reflection back on that problem, which we were talking about earlier. And then obviously the implementation stage as well. So there's kind of lots of different elements to it, lots of different roles that you have to put in. And it's kind of that, I think, just making sure you bring the right people in at the right time, and always having the person who's going to be at the end of that product or service in with you throughout the journey. And I think that's sometimes where projects are kind of letting people down a little bit by bringing them in too late in the testing process and not having them there from the very outset. So I think there's just loads to consider, that multidisciplinary element, and then bringing in all the right techniques, like almost kind of pick and mix from all of the different professions along the way. So it's just a very interesting topic, and we could probably talk for the full hour about this, couldn't we? Really?
Fortunately, we will be talking about techniques in a bit, but certainly I like the point you're making about going into different levels of detail. So going back from the issue to the proposed solution, and of course having the people affected by the solutions involved as well, i.e. the people that have the problem, or they recognise the opportunity, because they're the people that experience the problems on a day-to-day basis, or they're on the sharp end. So I agree, they should be the people that we work with to find out, is there more to it than perhaps we might understand, or are the solutions that we're putting forward, are they really workable? Because we might not necessarily know all the other things going on.
Yeah, and almost kind of being able to step back and stop and pause and go back to square one if needs be, because there's nothing worse than carrying on a project when you're not solving the right problem, or you've gone down the wrong path. It's better to just stop as quickly as possible and go back on yourself almost.
That's right.
Stefan, do you have a view on this?
Oh, so many views. But one thing is also important, like at which level, because you can have a problem with a screen on your application, which is something I'm not doing anymore for many years. If it's more like we have a business problem, then I hook in. I'm not so more involved within really IT solutions, whereas I do work together with functionalists, but don't do it myself anymore. So if it's on the business problems, maybe the four requirement categories on the BABOK, business, stakeholder, solution, and transition requirements. And they recommend to start with the business requirements. Why are we going to do a change? Why? And if you do why, and then we come back to the techniques later on, but the 5 whys is one technique to discover a problem, one of the best ones I use, but it also always has to do with taking a step back. Maybe are being able to do abstraction, take a step back, abstraction, take a step back together with the people from the business. So why do you want to change? Well, and then you do those 5 whys. Don't stop with the second or the third. Don't do that. Really make sure you're at the 4th or maybe the 5th. At that moment, you get an idea what the problem or the opportunity is. But again, I'm not too much into IT problems or IT opportunities. It's more like business problems and business opportunities. It's like, why are we doing the goals and objectives? Like Elizaveta already mentioned earlier, the goals and objectives, it's telling the why you're going to change something.
I think their points made in terms of whether or not you're focusing on technology or functionality or the business. think it's always important to understand the business perspective first. So, you know, why are we building something? Is it to resolve a problem, or is it to realize an opportunity? If it doesn't fall into one of those two buckets, then there's a significant concern as to why we're not doing something. So I think, yeah, definitely well-made points there, Stefan.
5 whys is brilliant. I used that last week in a set of housing workshops, and it really helps in a really simple way to break stuff out, and you get multiple requirements just by asking why, and end up going down kind of deviating paths. It's a really nice technique and so simple, isn't it? It's lovely.
Does anyone know the 5 monkeys social experiment? Oh, okay. Well, it's a story taking too long, but you have to look it up. And it's really the story which I experienced also in real life, is like, why are people doing that? Why are people sometimes copying stuff without asking why? And so 5 monkeys doing really weird stuff, totally against their nature. You have to look it up. It's very easy to find. 5 monkeys social experiment. And that is really what's happening in so many organizations. And then really people behave like those 5 monkeys.
I think, John, we need a link. We'll need a link when this gets posted.
Will do. Yeah, I shall certainly put that and any other links I should add to the post as well. That's for sure. I mean, I think as a technique as well, I mean, asking whether it's 5 whys or 6 or 3, I think just asking why in the first place is always an important discipline. I think that technique just reminds us to do it sometimes, but hopefully we don't need to rely on that technique to ask why for a problem.
But if you stop at a second, you're still scratching the surface.
I agree.
That's what I discovered. So I think you shouldn't stop before the 3rd or maybe the 4th why, really.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, because you're probably only just scraping the surface on your first few whys, because I think a lot of people talk about the symptoms rather than the underlying for the first few statements.
You have to go to the roots, like Elizaveta already mentioned, root cause analysis. The 5 whys is also a type of root cause analysis technique.
I think it's important there. I mean, I'm sure we'll come to this in a bit. Well, it's nice that we're covering it now, so we can save time for other techniques later. But I think as we explore the root cause of some of our problems, we'll tend to find as well that maybe there's a set of root causes that are actually creating a number of symptoms across
we uncover all the problems, and there are always more than
that's it.
than initially expected.
Yeah, and I like how I like how John and Stefan, you mentioned both. Like John, you said that sometimes you see, like, you ask different people the same questions and the answers start to deviate. And Stefan, that you said, like, okay, don't stop on a certain level of whys. I remembered myself that I was on several projects where I asked the same questions, different people, and they used the same term. But in fact, later it appeared that the same word was used for completely different entities, things, processes, and my, let's say, chance to reveal that was because I was new to the industry. Like, all the words were new for me, and I was kind of allowed to ask, what does it mean? What is that about? And when I got completely different descriptions of the same word, this is when I said, aha, maybe we have a bigger fish to fry here. And that was really an exploration moment for many of our stakeholders. And also, speaking about trying to find the problem, what problem we're trying to solve, I remember the case when I was working as an L1 support specialist, and the lady was calling me and she was in despair. She was saying, I see nothing on the screen. Like, the first idea, you would go and check your servers, if they're down, if they're up, but the point was that the screen was not turned on. The problem was very simple to solve. Just please click that button. Oh, here we are. Everything is working.
Feels like it would have been an awful shame to spend a lot of time trying to fix the laptop on it, or the system that sits behind it, when the screen's not even on, in that case. That's for sure. Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the points you've made. I mean, certainly from my perspective, it's definitely about understanding different aspects of the problem, going to the root cause. I think we sort of touched on it as well, sort of like that importance of getting different perspectives as well, because I think sometimes people's perspectives might appear different, maybe from the terminology, as Elizaveta was pointing out, or maybe just because they're seeing the problem from a different direction as well. And I think where they are, having knowledge of the different perspectives on a particular situation can allow us to bring the right stakeholders together to make sure we're fixing the right things, or indeed to make sure we've got awareness of the collective story as well. I always find it quite reassuring, actually, when I go to different people to get different perspectives, and I either hear the same thing, whether it's good or bad, same thing, but I hear the same. So that's quite reassuring that the people I'm talking to are telling me a fairly consistent story and that they're problems they have. But equally, it's quite useful when they tell me quite different things, because that means I can bring those people together to talk as a group. Because quite often I find that it may be that as a BA you're introduced into the organisation new, so you don't necessarily recognise the terminology or understand the processes. So I generally take the basis of foundational view that it's probably me misunderstanding each stakeholder a little bit. So if I bring them together where it appears as a misunderstanding, I'll probably find out that actually they're in line, but it's just me misunderstanding it. But whatever happens, the outcome of the session will be that we're all in alignment. We all know the terminology, and I understand the problems, and hopefully a little bit more than that as well, like the root causes. That's for sure. Good. And we started touching on, obviously, techniques as well. Thanks to the 5 whys being mentioned. I think, Joe, you talked about a few others there, such as process. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you again, actually, just purely because you did such a good job of naming some techniques there. I feel like it's a shame to sort of steal your thunder and let someone else take those good ideas first, because otherwise I'd take that idea.
Oh gosh, I mean, I'd say in terms of the techniques that I end up using, it really depends on the project, it depends on the program, it depends on what problem you're trying to solve, it depends on who you've got in the room. Sometimes you can do like quite creative kind of sketching and mock-ups and various things. You can do, crazy eights if you want people to do the kind of sketching and various things, or you might have a slightly more technical audience who want that level of detail where you're looking at wireframes, mock-ups, thorough research, desk-based, user research, all sorts of things that have to feed into it. But I guess my industry is probably a little bit different to the others on this call because it's more public sector based, and I tend to go by the book to a certain extent. I will take what's in the books and the best practice and then kind of adapt it and change it for the industry that I work with, because quite often the techniques that are out there don't work for the sector that you're working in, or they're too detailed, or there's not enough detail, and you have to kind of flex it a little bit with collaborative tools and try and make it as engaging as possible with you.
I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, social workers, for example, you can't sit and do a complete process map with a social worker very easily. You have to try and get that information in a quick way that keeps their attention while they're having to jump onto other things. So I think it's just that adaptation of techniques and kind of allowing as part of our industry, which I'm not sure the other views on that on the call, because I guess it's a contentious thing, isn't it? Changing the standard ways of typically doing things.
I think there's so many examples of different techniques you can use, and I think every technique out there, I'm very much of the view that if you can adapt the technique for the better, and the better might be better for that scenario, then you should, because I think all tools, if we think about the hammer or the screwdriver as an example, they've evolved over time. We haven't got the same screwdriver we had 1,000 years ago. We had them. I don't know if we did, but probably didn't. But I think we just adapt them all the time. And I think even if it's just the way we visualize, and even putting simple things like putting different colors on a technique, or just putting highlighting areas through to completely changing it so that it resonates with the audience is fine.
And also how you run them as well. I mean, we used to do things in person all the time, and since COVID everyone's working from home, and we've had to adapt our tools and techniques to as well, which has been, I think, a big challenge in our industry as well.
So, Stefan, I'm going to hand over to you now, mate, to just give your perspective on techniques for opportunities and problems.
As John already said, it really depends on the situation. So, for example, the 5 whys already mentioned, I've been there, done that. I got a T-shirt, many T-shirts. But another way, also depending on if, for example, you arrive in a project that a solution is already chosen. You do some reverse engineering. So what do you want to achieve with that solution? So why are you taking that solution? And what's the goal? So depending on how they present to you the project, you might want to ask stuff like, so what do you mean? What do you want to achieve with that? If it's the solution, okay, reverse engineer. Yeah, it's difficult. It really depends on the situation. And also what is very important is to know your stakeholders. Stakeholder mapping, different kinds of stakeholder mapping. Didn't you forget anyone? Because maybe the stakeholder that you haven't seen might have the words of the real problem of the opportunity. It's very much possible. Also, what I encountered, having worked in more than 20 different industries, is that cognitive bias, blind spots, is also something that really prevents people to see the problem. And therefore, I really recommend to invite, if it's an important project, one or two or a few external consultants, BA consultants, generalists that are very good in finding or getting to know a new business domain, because they are really asked the stupid why questions. It's like, there are no stupid questions. Well, in a lot of domains, business domains, they say, why you ask that kind of stupid question? And at a certain moment, it's like, now I see how oh, okay. So sometimes in different industries, they tend to do the same stuff already for 20, 25, 30 years, like the 5 monkeys, and don't know anymore why it was. For example, the Y2K problem, it grew because the memory was so expensive that they only took the last 2 numbers of the year. And then with Y2K, big problems. Most of us are a bit too young maybe to understand the problem, but that was the reason. But already in the 90s, memory was not that expensive anymore. Then they still continue to do that, and they didn't know why anymore. And so people keep on doing the same stuff without knowing the reason why. It's like this grandma had this small frying pan. No, I'm not going to tell that story. Forget it. Scrap it. Sorry. I'm not going
I
to
feel like
that.
that was going to be an interesting story there, Stefan. We may have to.
It is an interesting story, but it will take me too long, just like the 5 monkeys. But invite a few external, good generalists that really can challenge you the way of working. I'm going to tell you one little story. I was doing a big project, a migration project from mainframe to Unix, with an author right organization, doing author rights like musicians, composers, and so on, author rights. And they had their own BAs, but they hired external BAs to challenge their way of working. And I have to say, it was a big project. So also the IT development was with Indian people, but the business analyst, this was the most exciting project I've ever done, because really we could challenge it. Like, why are you doing that? And at some moment they discovered, like, it doesn't make sense anymore to do that way. You're right. And it was the BA part of that project was so much fun.
Could be quite controversial. Well, I imagine that's quite a controversial approach to bring people into challenge, but really interesting.
Yeah, you know, in a lot of industries, they say we don't want people that don't have that kind of domain knowledge. And so it's like, why? Because a business analyst should not be a subject matter expert. If he is, he might grow the same blind spots as all the other subject matter experts. And you should try to avoid that. I don't want to become a subject matter expert. Like every 2-3 years, I change from another to another customer. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get to more than 20 industries. But it's challenging. And 20 of those customers, more than 20 of those customers, they really agreed, like, it makes some added value to have someone external view. And sadly enough, if you're already for 5-10 years in the same industry, you won't be able to do that as good as someone external, because yeah, you got those blind spots. I've got blind spots in my private life. Everyone has. Really everyone. Cultural blind spots and so on and so on. So be aware you have blind spots and be open-minded to it. But
that's right. I think that's why it's important, I think, to do things like this as well, because from speaking to different people outside of perhaps your usual BA circle, you get to appreciate others do things slightly differently. There's always something you can learn from them as well. And I think we sort of owe it to ourselves. We learn something to make it part of our own way of working as well. And who knows, off the back of that, we might share something useful ourselves. I'm sure we all would all do. But it's certainly having that mindset, almost like a childlike mindset, to be inquisitive and looking for new information, and not being afraid to ask a question, even those theoretically silly ones. Although I always think it's a stupid question is only a question you already know the answer of before you answer it. I think everything else isn't a stupid question. And half the time you can kind of feel the relief sometimes in the room. You ask that question, you feel people going, thank God someone else has asked that. I didn't want to ask it.
I'm curious about the techniques from Elizaveta on problem discovery.
Yeah, and actually the one which I want to highlight, I double checked, it's not mentioned on BA BOK as a separate technique, but I think this is what makes a BA a business analyst, let's say. We active listeners. We listen attentively, and this is what helps us to ask the good questions, to get those tiny bits of strange things and ask questions about them. And also what John mentioned is that even with pandemic, we went online, but still we need communication. And in online communication, as BAs, we again have to listen attentively, even though we work remotely. And maybe we have to be even more attentive to details than usually, because we're not in the same room. We have to pick up all the details in remote environment, maybe without even facial clues or some body language clues that we may collect in face-to-face interaction. So that's, I believe, thing that can be applied to all the BA BOK techniques that we mentioned: business process analysis, glossary creation, whatever. You need to actively listen and collect everything.
Well, the BABOK is almost more than 8 years old, almost 9. So a lot of techniques, but active listening is still mentioned, but in the underlying competencies.
Yes, exactly.
It's mentioned there, and I think it's very important. Thanks for putting that up. I think it's very important. The body language, switch on those videos. Like, oh, I hate those Zoom sessions where people don't switch on, or team sessions without those videos. It's like the mimics, the people, big integration question mark in on top of the front heads. Like, it's so important. Yeah.
That's it. And I think that allows you as well, when it goes on to help you build relationships with people that you're working with and understand them a little bit more. And I think sometimes, quite often, in fact, that you get a certain amount of information, maybe from the workshop or the requirement session you've organised, but you also get a load maybe walking from the room back to the desk, or in the case of its virtual call, you know, when the formal side of the call's over and you're just sort of wrapping up and saying your thank yous, that someone just mentioned something and it's like, oh, okay, interesting. Could you just share that? Let's hear about it. Or just reach out to them separately to hear a little bit more about their story as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because also I noticed, especially it was during face-to-face conversations in big groups, that if managers were present together with their subordinates, usually managers were speaking and subordinates were agreeing or trying not to, let's say, speak too much. And only when I got to interview people like face to face or one-on-one online, they, without, let's say, the pressure of upper management, they were speaking more openly about the day-to-day issues they have, like, oh, I have this button which is not clickable, or something, some very tiny bits of information that you would never get in a broadroom discussion.
And by doing that, Elizaveta, you've sort of become a representative for that stakeholder as part of the analysis. You can take on the understanding to an extent of the problem or the situation they're out there talking about, but then you can represent them. So that if they're a little bit lacking in confidence or not willing to say much to a wider audience, you're aware enough to at least be able to broach the topic so that others in the room will discuss it. So yeah, it's definitely a point I would call out.
Alongside that thing is like, if you have a big change initiative, people are very often resistant to change. So you have to earn their trust and trustworthiness. Sometimes you can do with the empowerment, a lot of techniques in getting people's trust. But if you don't have that sensitivity, I don't think you'll become a very good BA. You really need to know body language, motivate people to or engage people into a change initiative, which is sometimes very threatening for them. So yeah, that's also very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I often find that when I'm speaking to approach stakeholders for the first time, very few of them are actually dedicated entirely to listening to me the whole day, which is no surprise. They're mostly doing a day job, which probably takes up the full 8 hours in their day. So to have me potentially block out 30 minutes of it, there needs to be some value to them, or needs to at least demonstrate that I'm going to use it in the most appropriate way. And I think that means for me, making sure that I take the time to understand who they are, their perspective, what their problem is, understand how I should represent them, and understand how I can keep them in the loop as well, so that they can hear the outcomes of any sessions that I might have. I think as well, sometimes, talking about techniques, I think sometimes an interesting technique for me to introduce is around investment appraisal and business case. And it's to think about each problem or opportunity as a minute business case in some situations. Depends on what it is, of course, but if you can think about each problem in terms of, well, what's the benefit of us fixing it, or what's the impact of this problem financially, be it in people or actual cost, it can help you prioritize those problems and then hopefully lead on to focusing on the highest priority problems or the highest priority opportunities as well. So for me, that's certainly a technique I think about a little bit in that regard. Good. All right. Well, I feel like we've covered a whole host of techniques there as well, and touched on a few topics that I'm sure we'll talk about over subsequent BA sessions, as well as touching on one topic which we seem to bring up, has come up almost on every BAInsights session as well, and that's all about like listening and moving into different domains as well. So I'm sure that will come up again. I guess my next question that I have is really around challenges and how to overcome them in relation to problems or opportunities. And I wonder, Stefan, if I could start with you this time, if that's all right. So what problems you might have encountered in terms of, or challenges rather, what challenges might have you encountered in terms of identifying or confirming or validating the problem or validating the opportunity? And then how have you overcome them?
Who's that question to, sorry?
To whom? Because you
Stefan, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, the one example that I was giving, that was in an HR environment. They decided on a solution, the very expensive one, and I tried to understand why they want to have that solution, what the goal was. And so it's like, okay, okay. So I'm going back to the drawing board, and we'll meet each other again in a week or so. And I went back to the drawing board and was putting everything on the flip chart with the post-its and everything. And it's like, what do you want to achieve? And I was really brainstorming with a colleague, and at the end we thought like, but it can't be that easy. It can't be that easy, can it? And so I went back and I proposed like, now, okay, you want to achieve that. Imagine you would do first this and then that and then that. Would that still solve your problem? So I made a little process drawing, but a very easy one and not a very complicated one. Would that solve your problem? And it says like, yeah, okay, that was great. Why is that great, Stefan? Well, I did a check with the people knowing your software, your existing software that you're using today, and we can do that with the existing software. It will save you a lot of money. No, we want that solution. Yeah, but okay, why you want a solution? Because you just said that this solves your problem. Yes, it does. So why you want to have that solution? The taxpayer is paying that software. Don't forget, because it was one of the biggest cities in Belgium, and then it's like, yeah. Well, if you do a business case here, you won't get it. You won't get that software, really. No, I don't think I will. Okay, let's go and explore that a little bit more. And after 2 weeks, it was decided. We made a big thing, a lot of because 4,000 or 5,000 people were involved, so marketing campaign and so on and so. It was a total of 50,000 euros, and it was going to cost 20 times that much, and then with a recurrent cost of 2 times that much. Like, yeah, it's like really look into what you want to achieve. What is really the outcome you want to get? And if people don't understand that, maybe you're talking to the wrong people, because often as a BA, you're talking with the users or people that will become users, and they are not always very good in taking that step back. And then you do some reverse engineering of what they're doing, and then you'll get there. But it's sometimes very difficult to find that people that are able to have this helicopter view of the problem. But well, I've managed a few times, but this is the example that I tend to use most of the time, because it's the one that's shortest to explain.
Excellent. I mean, it certainly sounds like a very appropriate example, Stefan. So thank you for sharing that. And Elizaveta, I can start hand over to you now for your. You've come across any challenges, and have you overcome them in this area?
Yeah, so for me, as a external BA for long years, it was the biggest challenge that I was added to the project at the implementation stage, because we were the vendors who were implementing software solution for a client, for an organization outside our own organization. So usually by the time I was involved, the contract was signed, the solution was selected, and then I'm coming with my why questions, and yeah, people wouldn't change their minds at that stage. So the biggest challenge for me was to really, even in that environment when everybody decided everything, try to change some opinions and turn the thing into more productive outcomes, so that yes, maybe the initial solution or initial idea were like too much for solving that initial problem. So let's think about what opportunities we have in the given situation that we can solve the problem, and maybe also kind of save some money, time, and efforts on achieving that. And another issue which I noticed during the last 2-3 years is maybe because many organizations thought that agile means no documentation, while Agile Manifesto says that working solution over extensive documentation. And now I see that it's often not documented what's the problem. Even though in all the agile practices and all the best guidelines, it said like define the problem and then go to the solution. Usually what I have is just the Jira tickets with the implementation details, but no answers to why we are doing this way. So I guess this is the biggest challenge right now, to find those problem definitions.
Yeah, and be there as early as possible before the solution is already chosen. That's a challenge, and currently with my current customer, I'm there at that position, so that I'm very happy, because I've been in that position so many times, and it's not so much fun.
I think I've heard that a lot actually from lots of various BAs I've spoken to over at least the last year of these BAInsights. And I think the more we can do to help educate and work with our stakeholders so that they can get awareness of the benefits of having BAs around a lot earlier can certainly help. Now, unfortunately, they might have missed the opportunity if you come into a project halfway through, but hopefully they'll appreciate it for the next project. That's for sure. I'm conscious as well, Joe, I haven't asked you the question around challenges. Yeah. So
no, I think just to reiterate the same points, really, it's kind of the biggest challenge is getting people into the room, and certainly in the public sector, when your customer is basically everyone in a location, how do you design services that meet the needs of everyone? And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is trying to do the user-centered design piece and bring in people from the community, when actually a lot of people from the community aren't available. They're very busy, or they work away, or they can't get in to help us design services. So trying to pick the kind of service users and customers that represent what you're trying to do without introducing bias, like you were saying, Stefan, is very challenging to do that in a way where someone doesn't have a very defined idea of what they want. You want to kind of get that consensus from the group. I think it's really hard to do when you're talking about residents and a really wide range of customers. So definitely that user-centered design piece is a big challenge in how do you solve a problem.
So, yeah, and I think it sort of touches as well on the context of a problem. And I know you mentioned process earlier on, Joe, and I think that for me is a technique I often use to try and appreciate where the problem relates or what the opportunity relates to, by understanding the correlated process or processes. That's certainly useful.
Yeah, it's a very visual way of doing it as well, isn't it? Because people can follow the flow. You can highlight it red if it's a really bad bit, or you can highlight it green where it's good. And it's quite a visual way of saying this is how it looks right now, actually what you want it to look like, and kind of stripping out all the horrible bits of it. And it's a nice visual tool that everyone can kind of get behind, I think.
Agree. And I think sometimes you can see you put all the problems on a process.
Yeah.
Many of the problems that are existing later on are as a result of the earlier problems. You know, where capturing data in the poor quality would be an obvious example that would definitely become a problem later on. So having that awareness
really
is
good point.
Sometimes you can have some situations that you are looking at a process and optimizing it, and then find out that the process is obsolete.
Yeah.
Therefore, you have other techniques to find which processes are still relevant at this moment, like a context diagram or stuff like that. So, well, we even had a project where we spent so many weeks on one process and to find out it's no longer useful. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That was an expensive diagnosis. Yeah.
Or that you've mapped the wrong part of the process because you've had the wrong people in the room and they've sort of gone into loads of detail on a sub-process. And you go, well, actually, that isn't actually the problem we were trying to solve. We just got the wrong people in the room because we didn't do our stakeholder work in the right kind of user groups and things.
Feels like a couple of sessions perhaps on stakeholders and process. I'm glad to say I've got both in the pipeline anyway. There's a cheeky advert in there, so yeah, keep an eye out for that one. I'll remind you when it comes up. I guess just the last point really to cover then probably is really around, are there any other points that you feel like we haven't covered that is relevant to the topic of opportunity and problem? And because it feels like we've gone through a lot, but if I start with Elizaveta, if I may, so any final points from you on this topic?
I would also highlight that when we define the problem, when we describe the problem, we shall be attentive to what we already have. Because sometimes, especially now when I'm working in a big organization with already established IT infrastructure, there are solutions already existing in the landscape, but not everybody knows about them because people outside of IT may not know that this tool is already used in that department, which is in another building in another country. And this is where, as a BA, we have to be very careful with introducing something new to the landscape, because again, we have to go through all the reviews, all these alignments on the corporate level. So I think that's a very good point to mention that when we define the problem, let's try thinking about if we can solve that problem without buying the new tool, as Stefan mentioned earlier, like how we can solve that problem with what we already have. And yeah, if we cannot, then new solution is fine.
Excellent point. And Joe?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Elizaveta. That's so important, kind of looking at what you've already got in the toolkit, so you're not repeating it. Completely agree. I think just it's been really interesting kind of hearing what other industries do, and that we're all facing kind of similar challenges just in slightly different ways. And it's really nice to kind of come together as a community and hear that we're not alone and we're all going through the same pains, and there are lots of solutions out there to help us.
It's always quite therapeutic, I think, when I speak to VAs and some of the things that you hold dear, they're also talking about. So you think, okay, I'm not going mad, I'm actually doing something that feels like it's the right thing anyway. So yeah, it's always good to hear. And Stefan, any final points from you?
Well, yeah, what I hear and see so often is that people always jump to solution. We are very solution oriented in our world, and it's I can't emphasize enough what Einstein says. Like, if you spend good enough time to find the real problem, the solution will find itself so much easier. You will get the solution already on table, on your plate. If you the 55 minutes and then the 5 minutes from Einstein's quote, I agree. It's like once you have very well understood the problem, and don't forget, Einstein also said, if you can't explain your problem to an 8-year-old, it means you don't understand it very well. So it's not only understanding the problem, but being able to communicate it to everyone, as well the 8-year as the 80-year-old. And then the solution will be very straightforward. That's what I believe.
I mean, I think the only point I would add to what you said, all of you, is really transparency for me is another thing that I might tend to share, which is really just trying to be transparent with the information I've received and understand as a BA in terms of what I perceive to be the issues or the opportunities and what's the context behind them. But I think that also makes me think about a point that Elizaveta made as well, in that, you know, what's already there. And it isn't always just what's there in terms of systems, but sometimes it's what's already there in terms of the pain points or opportunities, because organizations do go through cycles of thinking about this and capturing them. And it'll be a shame to ignore some of that stuff that's happened previously, because there's probably some good ideas on that list that still haven't been realized, but probably can be in the future. So I think having that awareness through transparency is helpful. But I think that's probably a nice point to end, particularly as the time as well. I don't want to keep everyone for the whole night. But just to say thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you. I look forward to speaking to you many times in the future as well, and listening out to various sessions that you might hold or attendance at BA events. I think like the BA Managers Forum, we'll talk about BA conference as well. So, and an IIBA, of course, Stefan as well. So I think plenty of opportunity to hear from each other over coming weeks, months and years, I'm sure. But thank you again for your attendance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.